Around an hour.
When did Ashrei become Ashrei? Like, when did the first two psukim get added into the pasuk?
Yeah, that's a very excellent question. It's interesting that the chapter of Tehillim, which is chapter 145, is not this, which we all call Ashrei, does not begin with Ashrei. It begins with Tehillah LeDavid, and then you have an alphabetical acrostic, except for the letter Nun, as we know, because Nun is Nefila, falling. David HaMelech did not want to begin with Nefila. The concept of saying that chapter 3 times a day is, of course, already in the Gemara. The Gemara says anyone that says Tehillah LeDavid 3 times a day is muftach lo, is guaranteed, whatever that means exactly, that they have a share in Olam Haba. So the notion that you say Ashrei 3 times, what we call Ashrei 3 times a day, is already in the Gemara. But again, the Gemara only refers to the chapter Tehillah LeDavid, which is Tehillim 145. Now, it is actually prefaced with 2 verses earlier than that, which are not part of the chapter. Ashrei Yoshrei Veisacha O Jahalucha Sela, which is much earlier, and Ashrei Am Shekachalo, Ashrei Am Shashem Elokav. So it's interesting that the psukim that begin with Ashrei are not part of what we call Ashrei. So the interesting question is, when were they added? So the truth is they were added pretty early. You already find them in the Sidurim of the Gaonim, Rav Amram Gaon, Rav Sadia Gaon, who indicated that the Minhag Yisrael was to add them earlier. Now, in terms of dates, that would mean the following. The Babylonian Talmud was finished around the year 700 approximately. The Gaonim, Rav Sadia Gaon, Rav Amram Gaon, you're talking about the 900s and the like. So they didn't invent it either. They were recording a minhag that already existed. So at some point between 700 and 900, such a minhag became nispashet. We don't know exactly who started it. We only know the earliest sources where it is brought down, and that is in the Siddur of Rav Sadia Gaon and Rav Amram Gaon. But it is interesting that Ashrei does not include Ashrei. That's very true. Yeah.
Can you explain all the different distinctions that make conservative Judaism heresy?
Can I explain all of the distinctions that make conservative Judaism heresy? What makes it kafira? The problem is this. Number one, I don't want to Badafka spend a long time knocking things. Conservative Judaism does not have a central meaning to say it means a lot of different things. In some ways, Reform Judaism is easier to identify because Reform Judaism, denies the idea that God gave the Torah, denies the authority of the oral law, so the heresy is very, very clear, both in terms of the denial of divine revelation at Sinai and in terms of denial of the concept of the oral law and even the binding nature of halacha. So it's fairly easy to talk about why Reform Judaism is heresy. And again, I'm not knocking Reform Jews. This is not a condemnation of individual people, but just in terms of the philosophy of the movement. To say why conservative Judaism is heresy is not so clear simply because conservative Judaism does not have a single definition. There are conservative rabbis who fundamentally are Orthodox, although probably in a more of a left-wing way. And there are conservative rabbis who are fundamentally Reform in that way. So it embraces a very, very big tent. In theory, if conservative Judaism just means that halacha has a flexibility, and therefore you need to know how to apply it to change circumstances. In theory, there is nothing wrong with that approach, per se. That is not heresy. That is historically what a posek did. And today, people are a bit more rigid, but even today, posek has to know how to apply the halacha to new circumstances. But the problem was that in the course of time, much of the conservative movement has become more and more leftist and more reform in orientation. So a lot of the movement is heretical for the same reasons as the reform movement. But qua movement, as a movement, it is hard to point out specifically what the heresy is. I think the heresy lies in the teachings of individual practitioners. I mean, let me give you an example, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I don't know. No matter what I say, I get hate mail. No, the conservative movement ordains women. Okay? Now, halakhically, that's a mistake. Halakhically, that is incorrect. It's wrong. Does that make it heretical, though? If somebody were to take the position that women can be ordained rabbis, yeah, it's wrong. It's a halakhic mistake. Please note, don't send me a letter that I'm endorsing the ordination of women. I am not. Okay? Got it. Okay. It's wrong. But as I've said many, many times, that not all errors in halacha amount to heresy or kafirah. I don't think the issue of women rabbis is a matter of ikrei Emunah. It's just a halachic mistake. So for me to say the conservative movement is heretical because they ordain female rabbis, that would not be a true statement. I can say they made a mistake, but whatever it will be. On the other hand, to the degree that, let's say, they would legitimate homosexual marriages, that actually would be heretical because they're taking a law of the Torah and they're saying it doesn't apply. Now, I can't say off the top of my head what the official stance of the conservative movement is on gay marriages, but there are certainly individual conservative rabbis that do legitimate it. And by the way, there are some very left-wing Orthodox rabbis that legitimate it. And that, I think, would be kfirah and the like. So I'm kind of fudging my answer simply because the conservative movement is so vague that you can't automatically point to the movement as heretical, but I think you can point to many, many conservative rabbis as heretical. Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein then took it one step further, and that is, even if you're an Orthodox rabbi, but if you affiliate with a movement where a large number of practitioners are heretical, then you yourself become tainted with that designation because you are kind of legitimating heresy within your movement. Right? So that's taking it one step further. So that would be Rav Moshe's argument. Yeah.
So, because the conservative movement, they also form their own Sanhedrin, so to speak, right?
Their own what?
Their own Sanhedrin, where they decide as a movement.
Well, they have a commission of halacha. I mean, they have a commission. But again, I mean, what am I going to condemn that? I mean, the Orthodox movements, there are Rabbinical Council of America, the RCA, also has a halachic commission who are supposed to be the poskim of the Rabbinical Council of America. So when you say they form their own movement to paskin, inherently there's nothing wrong with that except for the content of what they do paskin. You see, I mean, what is necessarily heretical about having their halachic commission if they would follow halacha in paskining their ways, So I couldn't call that apikorsis itself. Now, obviously, the whole essence of conservative Judaism is halacha is flexible and changeable. We believe they've taken that to a dangerous extreme. Yes, but that is, I mean, again, I hate to say this, but that is ultimately a matter of degree, meaning to say, if you were to ask me, can I subscribe to the statements that halacha is flexible and can respond to changing social concerns? The answer is yes. That is not an untrue statement. But it's untrue when it applies beyond the parameters of what is a legitimate halachic process. So you're not so much dealing with the official statements, you're dealing with the application of those standards. A lot of the standards in and of themselves are not necessarily objectionable. So, okay, I guess I just put on my flak jacket and whatever, yeah.
How can you explain the importance of full-time Torah learning to people who don't have Torah values?
Yes, how can you explain the importance of full-time Torah learning to those who do not have Torah values? It's an excellent question, and the short answer is you really cannot. It is very, very unfortunate. A believing Jew understands that Limud HaTorah has been one of the central pillars of what brings HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Rachamim into the world, what brings Bracha into the world, what gives us Hatzlacha. One has to understand that to take people who are learning and make them do other things is not just hurting them, it's hurting the nation. It is hurting the security of the nation. It is actually endangering Am Yisrael. That's the Metzias. This is not putting down soldiers. I've said many, many times that the IDF, we have to have a lot of gratitude for their Mesiras Nefesh, and that includes obviously the Hester boys who combine yeshiva learning and military service. And even a Hester Bacher will certainly say that he recognizes that Torah learning is an essential component. I mean, that's part of the identity. So that's absolutely the case. But once again, if you're not a person who believes in those Torah values, all you see when you see somebody sitting in a base medrash is you see a guy who's reading a book that he finds interesting, and that's great. It could have been Chinese hieroglyphics. It could have been advanced calculus. It could have been medieval history. All right, this guy happens to read Talmud. What is so special about it? Very, very difficult to convey that this is something that brings God's blessing. But basically, you try to make the case. You try to say that historically, look at all the Jews have been through, look at all of the nations that have tried to destroy us, and look at the fact that through our keeping of the Torah, God has preserved the Jewish people in a miraculous way. Maybe the person will buy it, maybe they will not buy it. I hope that you might be able to convince them, persuade them, bring them a little closer to understanding that fundamental truth. But it truly is an uphill battle. There are certain things that are very difficult to explain unless somebody subscribes to a certain belief system. I mean, I'll give you another example. Intermarriage. What do you tell somebody who is not religious, who is not raised with Torah, why they shouldn't marry a non-Jew? Come up with a non-Torah reason why intermarriage is wrong. So you sound like a racist. Well, you're supposed to marry your kind, you don't marry people that are different than you. Well, what? Judaism is racist, exclusionary? So it's very, very hard. Like people come to me all the time. They come to other rabbis and say, my brother or my cousin is going to marry a guy, and he doesn't keep anything. How do I convince him, not to do it? The short answer is you can't. The best you can do is if you could get him to simply go to yeshiva for a month, that may do the trick. Not because they're going to talk to him about intermarriage, but because as he learns Torah, he gets more sensitized. But one of the things you might point out is, although it doesn't prove anything, that somehow the value of religious learning has been recognized even by secular societies. I mean, the United States had a draft until the late 70s. I don't know the exact date, but during the Vietnam War, there was a draft, and of course there had been a draft earlier, World War II, and the like. And even at the height of the draft, students who were full-time rabbinical or clerical students were given a draft exemption. Now you may wonder, mehechi teisi, why would a secular society exempt people who were studying for the clergy? The answer is that even a secular society kind of recognized that we needed people who were involved in connecting with God and studying about religion in order to get God's blessings upon our endeavors. So the argument goes, if this was recognized by the United States during World War II, as well as Vietnam, then maybe Kal v'chomer, a Jewish state like Israel should recognize the importance of Torah learning. Of course, during the 1970s, 60s and 70s, the enrollment of yeshivas were at their height. Many people were going to yeshiva to get the draft exemption, and that, of course, was an improper use of it. But on the other hand, there were, B'nai Torah, sincere B'nai Torah, who legitimately were given that exemption. I remember having my draft card with my 4F. I don't remember. I think it was 4F was the name of the exemption for religious students. I think I mentioned before, forgive me for repeating it, but I just love the memory of it. My own Rebbe that I was closest to, Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Kolevsky, Zichrono Livracha, was actually drafted in the U.S. Army during World War II. And the story goes that he was in Torah V'das. He was a Talmud of Shlomo Hyman in Torah V'das. And in order to get the exemption, you had to declare to a draft board that you are studying to be a rabbi. And indeed, the yeshiva instructed every student that was asked by the draft board, why are you here? Say, I'm studying to be a rabbi. My Rebbe didn't want to say he's studying to be a rabbi because he wasn't studying to be a rabbi. He was studying Torah lishma. He was studying Torah to serve Hashem. He was told not to say that, but whatever it was, he felt it was a matter of Kiddush Hashem, that they asked him, what are you here for? And he says, I'm here because I believe that God wants me to spend my time studying his holy words. Well, that sounded like saying, I like to read Talmud or something, So they actually drafted him. He actually went into the army. His parents filed a lawsuit in federal district court, and I think after a year and a half or so, he got released. But it's interesting that, in a sense, he was Moser Nefesh because he did not want to say he was learning for a career. That wouldn't be the answer. But as I say, going back to your direct question, it is a difficult idea to convey. A lot of things are difficult. Even a frum person might ask, what is so spiritual about learning Gemara? I understand if you're learning Derech Hashem, if you're learning books of Musar, if you're learning, books that talk about Tikkun Hamidos. I get that. That's spiritual stuff. But I learn about oxen that gore cows, or I learn about eggs that are laid on Yom Tov, or I learn about two people who are holding a talus and they go into Beis Din, or how you marry a woman with kesef, shtar, and bia. Like, where's the spirituality there? Are we here to learn how to connect to God, or are we simply going to rabbinic law schools? It's a good question, right? I imagine that maybe some of you might have had that question. You come to yeshiva and you think the Talmud will answer the mysteries of life, the purpose of existence. And you're looking forward to that first Gemara share. And then it becomes a very technical discussion, which, if you like technical discussions, you'll like it. It might be intellectually engrossing. But where is the spirituality? And the answer is ultimately a non-rational answer. It's a mystical answer. And you only know it by the experience that hopefully you go through. And that is, this is connecting you to Hashem. When you're connected to Hashem, there are transformations that can take place within you that are not necessarily connected to the nature of the material that you're studying. You could be studying the most technical, arcane, almost irrelevant in terms of spiritual development topic. But you're connected to God. It's going to change him over time. I think people have found that. People have found that through their own experiences. But to explain that on a fully rational level, you're going to have trouble. So there's a lot of things in Judaism, a lot of things in life that are very, very true, but it's very hard to convey to somebody who is outside of the orbit of the system. That's why we have to say, try it, right? Try it, you'll like it. Used to be an old commercial. Meaning, Tamu, taste the Torah, and then you'll see. Meaning, I can't convince you when you remain outside of that system. Yeah.
So far we've been learning in Center Kedushin and Brachos.
Yeah.
It's been very gishmak. And but my question is, let's say later on, when you went to start learning things that are less practical to daily life, right? Because of course Brachos is tefillah, you're doing it all the time, and Kedushin you have a sense of it because
You want to get married?
Yeah, but I mean you also lead to weddings. So the concept is very much familiar with you. But when it comes to stuff that are it's not really part of life as we know today, like Karbanos and Shavuos, and would it also be as Gishmak learning those?
Well, everyone has, even though we shouldn't have favorites, but human nature is human nature, and everybody has their favorites. Certain sugyos that excite a person, and certain sugyos that are less exciting to a person. That's going to be the mitzias of life. But I think it's very, very true that Torah has a momentum. You connect to God. When you connect to God, you're closer to Hashem. So then you find every part of Torah interesting and fascinating. Even though initially that wouldn't be where you'd start because you're not yet there to feel the sweetness of it. But by learning brachos and by learning kedushin, you're going to learn zvachim and menachos also with excitement and passion. They tell a story. I'm not sure if the story is true, but they say that if you wanted to be a Talmud of the Vilna Gaon had a bechina, a certain test, if you could be his Talmud. So we would have thought, well, maybe the test would be you got to know Shas or something, or some like Rav Konik's test, a real hard test, whatever it would be. So they say that the test was very simple. You had to learn the first few chapters of Sefer Divrei Hayamim like 100 times. Now, what are the first few chapters of Chronicles of Divrei Hayamim? All it is a list of names. Odom, Shei, starting from Adam Harishon, Odom, Shei. Names. Just you read name after name after name after name, like all the way from Adam Harishon all the way to David HaMelech. A lot of names, a lot of generations. Most people would read that, and they might be bored out of their heads. So the Vilna Gaon's test was, if you could read those names like 100 times, and still have a geschmack, still feel, Baruch Hashem, it's Torah, that means you're ready to learn Torah at the highest level, because every part of Torah is enjoyable to you. There's nothing that's boring, nothing that's not uninteresting. So that's a high madrega, but that comes from the learning itself. Meaning the more you learn, the more you'll feel the sweetness of Torah. The idea that we should feel the sweetness of Torah is really important. My proof is very simple. Every single morning when we recite Birkas HaTorah, the blessing says, V'harev na Hashem Elokeinu es divrei seirascha. Make the words of your Torah sweet to us. That's really important. You want to feel the sweetness of Torah. But as the Chazon Ish says, that comes from the learning. Meaning initially when you learn, you may not feel that sweetness. But the more you stick with it, the more you hopefully will feel that sweetness. In fact, the Chazon Ish describes, and I have to admit to my shame, I've never experienced this, but he talked about a person who learns 12 hours straight. It's like a very ecstatic experience. He says, first of all, it takes 3 hours of uninterrupted learning till you're really into it. 3 hours. I mean, how many of us, to be honest, learn without interruption for 3 hours? He says, it takes 3 hours. And then you're in it. And then he says, and what happens at hour number 4 is you feel this unbelievable joy. And then hour number 5, you feel like you're in Shemayim. And hour number 6, he goes hour by hour. And by the time you hit I can't even repeat all the drama he puts into it. By the time you reach hour number 12, it's as if you're in Olam Haba Mamish in front of the Kisei HaKavod. This is what you get. But it requires a continuity. We unfortunately, and I include myself, we very, very rarely have a sustained continuity without interruption. We have coffee breaks, we have bathroom breaks, we have schmooze breaks. Okay, we're not Malachei Yashares. But you see, in some ways, we never get the optimal benefit, even from an hour of learning, because we break it up, even if we wind up learning 60 minutes. But the 60 minutes with the interruptions is not the same as 60 minutes without the interruptions. In fact, the Chazon Ish gave a famous mashal. Let's imagine you have a pot of water, and it takes 20 minutes to bring the pot of water to a boil. 20 minutes of heat. Every 19 and a half minutes, you shut off the flame, and you wait until the water cools down, and then you start it up. And 19 and a half minutes, same thing, over and over and over again. So you might be wondering, gee, I've had the fire on for 300 minutes, for 5 hours. How come it's not boiling? Because you never had 20 minutes straight. You had 19 and a half, and then 19 and a half, and then 19 and a half, and then 19 and a half. You can do it 1,000,000 times. And you're not going to get what you would have had with 20 minutes of continuity. Something to think about. There is something about the strength of continuity. This is the famous fort, they say, although there's a lot more to say about the story, about Rabbi Akiva. Remember Rabbi Akiva was learning for 12 years without seeing his wife, and then he comes home to see his wife after 12 years, and she overhears her saying to somebody, I wouldn't mind if he go for another 12 years. So he just turns around and goes back for another 12 years. So everyone asks the kasha, well, couldn't he have said hello? Couldn't he have had a cup of coffee? I go, what? He turns around without even saying hello? So the famous word of Aaron Cutler is, if he had the opportunity and the permission, he wanted to create a continuity of 24 years. Although, Lamaisa, there was a break and he's going, but he wanted to minimize that break. So it would be one unit of 24 rather than 2 units of 12. Right? Then you see that idea of continuity. So Be'ezras Hashem, I hope everybody here, I hope all of us will be zocheh to learn all of the chalakim of Torah and get geschmack, get an enjoyment, get a pleasure. By the way, the Chafetz Chaim has a very important Torah. You know, the Chafetz Chaim wrote many svarim on kachim, on korbanos. In fact, the whole modern learning of korbanos, which is considered to be the most advanced kind of learning, brisk and the like, comes from the Chafetz Chaim. He brought back the limud of the order of kachim to Klal Yisrael that had been neglected for hundreds of years. And someone said to the Chafetz Chaim, you know, why are you focusing on things that are not halacha l'maisa? Shouldn't you focus on things that are halacha l'maisa? As if the Chafetz Chaim, who wrote the Mishnah Brura, was not concerned with halacha l'maisa, right? I mean, okay, but everyone always says there's something to complain about. So the Chafetz Chaim gave a very interesting answer. He said, you know, there's a special importance sometimes in learning things that are not nogea l'maisa, because the only way I get the light of that mitzvah is by learning. In other words, things that I'm able to do, like tefillin. So even if I don't learn the laws of tefillin, I get the light of tefillin in my neshama by wearing them. But things like korbanos, you know, if I'm not able to do it, it's the learning that gives me the light of that mitzvah. And since every mitzvah brings light to a different part of your body, the 248 positive commandments are the bones, and the 365 negative commandments are the sinews. So if I don't have the light of a mitzvah, there is something defective in me, right? So the Chafetz Chaim said that although we do give priority to things that are nogea l'maisa, but you have to remember it's very, very important to learn things that are not nogea l'maisa, because otherwise you're spiritually defective. Your neshama is not complete in those important ways. Yeah.
What goes into giving a haskama for a bit? Just say so.
Yeah, that's a real good question. I have given the past year, I call it a michtav bracha, I don't use the word haskama per se. I have given probably 250 haskamas. It's exhausting. I mean, every time I tell people now, I don't do it anymore. And they say, well, can't this be the last one? Okay, so I keep on doing it and doing it and doing it, even though I actually don't want to do it anymore. But if you look, in any sefer, mainly the ones in English, you know, I got a letter for everybody. So you get a reputation as being an easy guy to get a haskama from, and that's, unfortunately, that builds on itself. Okay, forget about the venting there. But what comes into a haskama is, number one, I will tell you honestly, this is true for me, but it's true for everybody. It's not only me. The person who gives a haskama almost never reads the entire book. It's not shaykh. But you have to read enough of the book that, number one, you understand the author's mahalich. You understand the author's sources that they draw upon. Are these makairos that are authoritative makairos like Chazal, or Chasidus, or Kabbalah, or Musar, or the like? And you want to get a sense that the author has emunas chachamim, respect for gedolim, and finally, of course, that the author has a meaningful message that they're trying to communicate. So you have to ask yourself, is this a sefer or a book that is worthwhile for Jewish people to read? Now, it doesn't mean worthwhile for every Jewish person to read. There may be books that are suitable for beginners and maybe not for somebody advanced, or there may be a book that's suitable for somebody who's advanced and not for a beginner, but that's fine. But if it is a suitable, kosher contents book with emunas chachamim and connection to a makoros and respect for kavod Torah, then we give a haskama. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be a masterpiece, but it's something that's worthwhile, something that's kedai to to allow on the market, so to speak. So, Baruch Hashem, a lot of people, as I've discovered, a lot of people write books. It's quite amazing, and Baruch Hashem, a lot of the books are very, very good. And as a result, there's been an explosion in books and in Sfarim on all sorts of subjects, and different people benefit from different things. You know, the Baal Tanya himself writes in the Hakdama to the Tanya, in his humility, he says, you know, why do you need another Sefer on Avodas Hashem? You know, why do you need it? Now, why am I writing the Sefer? So the Baal Tanya says that particularly when it comes to inyanim of Musar, Avodas Hashem, how to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everybody has a different wavelength, meaning some Sfarim may move one person, like, you know, one person may be very, very moved and disorder by one type of Sefer. And then another person will read the same Sefer, and it's going to leave them cold. It just doesn't compute. It doesn't speak to them. So the Baal Tanya says in Avodas Hashem, we need different types of Svarim, because there are different types of Neshamos. They connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu using the same Akaris, Chazal using the same Akaris. But they connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in different ways. So that's why, part of why we have so many different types of books. Some books work well for some people, and some books work well for other people. You think about it in Sifrei Musar. You know, if someone would ask me, what is the best Musar Sefer to learn? So the standard answer, the official answer, would be Mesilas Yesharim, which of course is a great, great masterpiece of midos and character development. And we know from Rabbi Salander and from Chaim Volozhiner even that Mesilas Yesharim was the Iker Sefer of Musar. And yet, I can tell you, many of you might know Rav Reisman Shalita, the Rosh Hashiva of Torah V'das, that we're Zocha to, he comes to Ohr Somayach every summer. And Rav Reisman said that when he was a bacher, Rav Pam told him he wasn't allowed to learn Mesilas Yesharim because he had such a conscience that it made him feel guilty, it made him feel depressed, and Mesilas Yesharim was not the right Sefer for him, right? Even though it's the greatest classic. So in Sifrei Musar too, you got to find the Sefer that speaks to you in a positive way. So when you read Haskama, you ask yourself, you know, is this a Sefer that speaks to any group of people who might benefit might be Nisorah from the Sefer? Yeah.
Nowadays, it's become very common on Shabbos or Yom Tovim during Shachris or Musa to sing during Kedusha. So where did this come from? When did it start? And why is it okay? Because most of the time you can't hear the Chazan.
Yeah. So this is interesting. The issue of singing, especially singing during Kedusha, which is, a time that you're not supposed to talk, you're not supposed to be mafsik, and you're supposed to hear the Chazan. So it is very, very true that historically, and of course in the Beis HaMikdash, of course, we had the Levium singing, but that wasn't interrupting anybody's davening because nobody else was davening. We were just listening to the Levium singing. So the truth of the matter is it's fairly late origin, meaning it is not the original minhagim of Klal Yisrael. The original minhagim of Klal Yisrael did not involve a lot of singing during davening. We had Shemiros, maybe L'cha Daidi, which is not really part of a service kavua. Perhaps there was singing, even though I'm not sure we have so many rayas either, even for L'cha Daidi. So there are different origins, though. Some singing came in through Hasidus, which emphasized ecstatic singing and dancing during davening. Some came in through the German Orthodoxy, which was trying to, in order to keep people in the fold, they were adopting some of the customs of Reform, which in turn adopted the customs of churches where they had choirs and the like. So you have Hasidus, you have German Orthodoxy trying to keep people in by the formality of Reform. And then in the United States, congregational singing became very, very popular at the beginning of the 20th century through the Young Israel movement. You know, I know yeshivish people like to knock Young Israels because they represent superficial, orthodoxy and the like. But the truth is, Young Israel played a very, very pivotal role in the preservation of American Orthodoxy at a time when there were very, very few yeshivos or even day schools in the country. If you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, there were almost no yeshivas at all. Almost no yeshivas. Almost no day schools. And Orthodoxy was dwindling. It was hanging by a hair. And young Israel, and who was from? Old European people whose kids largely left Yiddishkeit. But these were the old Yiddish-speaking immigrants who had their shtiblachs and their shuls, and they were dying out. So the invention of Young Israel, as its name suggests, Young Israel, was a way of kind of making the synagogue more attractive to younger American kids. And they did it in a lot of ways, but one of the ways they did it was by introducing congregational singing that got people more into the Ruach. This is pre-Shlomo Carlebach, right? This is before Shlomo Carlebach. This is the early 19th century. Early 20th century. They also did stuff that was a little questionable. They used to sponsor dances. They used to have Saturday night dances. Now, again, Gedolim condemned it. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, who came from Europe, actually signed a letter against it. About it, halachically, it wasn't proper. And yet, I'll get in trouble for this. At a time when the potential was intermarriage, and by having boys and girls, men and women, interact, Jewish men and women, that facilitated staying within the Jewish people. You see, it's a complicated issue. There were some positives in that attitude as well. Now, eventually, after World War II, the yeshiva started. Rav Aaron Kotler came, Rav Moshe Feinstein, etc. So Judaism got much more halachically compliant and rigorous. So some of the Young Israel things became no longer proper. But one has to recognize that they were really pivotal in creating a holding pattern for Orthodox Jews who otherwise just would have totally assimilated. So going back to your question, one of the things that they made very, very popular was the notion of singing. Now, the original Young Israel singing involves another halachic problem, a lot of repetitions of words. So, I remember growing up, during Musaf, Yismechu b'malchuscha shomer Shabbos. They would sing, and they would do a thing like every sentence they would repeat Yismechu b'malchuscha like a chorus and the like. And obviously, to repeat words in Chazaras Hashatz is totally usher, totally improper. But they did it, whatever. They did things that were not halacha, but it did keep people there. So, as they say, so the three sources of singing are certain groups of Hasidim, German, Neo-Orthodoxy, and in America it was the Young Israel movement in the beginning of the 20th century. So you see that it's not such an ancient tradition. The notion of singing during davening was not something that goes back so long ago. Now, in terms of Kedusha, in terms of hearing the Chazan, that's an interesting question. Obviously, the Chazan should speak loud, should say the words loud enough that we hear him, or he should wait. People are singing. After they finish singing, he should then say over the words that he didn't say. So that is an issue. But other than that, the only problem would be repeating words, which is a problem. And the other issue is hefsek. You're not allowed to talk during Kedusha except if you say the words of Kedusha. Now, if I already said those words silently, and then when the Chazan is singing, I sing along with the Chazan, and I say those words, it's like repeating words. I'm being mafsik in Kedusha. Not allowed to do that. So what's the Eitzah? The Eitzah either is, I don't say the words until the Chazan is saying them, and then I say it along with him, or I just sing the nigun, but don't say the words. Now that also creates a problem. Is humming a nigun, or is singing a nigun without words, is that treated as a hefsek? Right, it's an issue. It's an issue on Rosh Hashanah too, where you're not allowed to be mafsik in Chazaras Hashatz because of the shofar blowing. All right, but there is a makam to be makel if it's a wordless nigun. So, as I say, in a lot of the European yeshivas, Mir, Slobodka, the old yeshivas of Lita, they did not sing during davening. Even the Chadodi, they often did not sing in many, many places. But sometimes the door might need it. We might need it a little bit, and so there are reasons to encourage it. Yeah.
I, for some reason, rather often get a question which seems to have an anti-Semitic undertone, which is,
Yeah.
well, if all the Jews are together left Mitzrayim once upon a time, or most of them anyway, or 1/5 of them, how come they all look so different? Now you got white Jews, you got black Jews, you got a whole range in between, blue-eyed, dark-eyed, all kinds, all hair colors and so on.
No, it actually is a very, very excellent question. If we consider the Jewish people to be primarily an ethnic group that are descended from common ancestors, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the people who left Mitzrayim, whatever it would be, these are the Jewish people, then how do you account for the genetic diversity in terms of skin and eye color? If we're all from Middle Eastern origin, we ought to be like Sephardim, darker complexions, or like Arabs, or the like. How do you explain blonde, blue-eyed, or European-looking, and the like? It is a very, very difficult question, actually. Now, obviously, some of it comes from converts that have entered the system. We've had Gerim over the years. There was a theory, and again, I address it to the hate mail people. Please do not tell me the theory has been discredited. I know that it has. Pardon that little interruption there. But there had been a theory for many, many years that the Khazars, remember the Khazars? The Khazars were a warlike tribe in Russia, going all the way back to the 800s, the 9th century, that converted. Their king decided to convert his nation to Judaism. And that was a true story. There actually was a Khazar nation that had converted to Judaism. Rav Yehuda Halevi wrote the whole philosophical book, the Kuzari, based on that true story. He made up the dialogue. He made up the questions, the answers, the philosophical discussions to prove that Judaism is a true religion. But the dramatic structure that he used to convey the philosophical ideas were the dialogues between the king of the Khazars, which are the Khazars, as we say it, and the Chaver, the rabbi. Right? So the Sefer HaKuzari is actually based on this story. But there was a theory that virtually all Ashkenazic Jews are not descendant at all from the Yotzei Mitzrayim. They are descended from the Russian Khazars, in which thousands and thousands of them entered into the genetic pool. There are books about this. There are books that actually say that Ashkenazi Jews are virtually all descended from the Khazars. Again, many people have claimed that theory is discredited. I'm not advancing it as true. But nevertheless, even if you don't accept the wholesale, adulteration of the Jewish gene pool, Ashkenazi gene pool through the Khazars, certainly there was the element of conversion that entered the pool. And in truth as well, some say that even within Middle Eastern populations, there is a more of a genetic diversity than you might think. So, for example, there are Iranians. Most Iranians have dark complexion, have Middle Eastern, somewhat Arabic, although they're not Arabic features. But there are Iranians that are blonde and blue-eyed, meaning there is a genetic diversity, so that could exist within the Jewish people as well. But it is a good question. I wouldn't necessarily call it anti-Semitic. It is a curiosity of how many different gene types have entered the Jewish pool. Yeah.
So science has attempted to come up with its own narrative of creation.
Yeah.
So what aspects of it does the Torah completely reject? And what aspects are, because maybe the Torah is not so clear on the details that maybe certain elements of the theory could be true. This would pertain to such as, evolution of man, age of the universe and world, was the world actually created in 7 days of 24-hour periods? What point along this process does the Hebrew year zero start?
Yeah. So the issue becomes we have a scientific account of what the process of the creation of the world was and the age of the earth and everything else. And the question is, what parts of that would the Torah absolutely reject, that we could not accept? What parts can we accept? What parts are subject to interpretation? This is the general problem of what are called the conflicts between science and Torah and religion, and what can we do? Well, again, this is a matter of great, great controversy, and in fact, even Ohr Somayach has posted some shiurim that I've given on it, and other Rabbi Gottlieb, other people have given on it as well. It is a matter of great, great controversy in the following way. There are many that do say, hey, by definition, we cannot accept evolution because Chumash Bereshis says God made Adam, and you cannot say he evolved from an ape. They would say we cannot accept an age of the earth that is billions or millions of years, actually billions of years old, because we are in the year 5,785, right, etc. And therefore, there are many who take the position, in fact, that might actually be the majority position in the Haredi world, that the whole scientific account is batel and sheker and cannot be accepted, and one who does accept it is a kofar and an apikoros. That is one school of thought, a very, very prominent school of thought. However, there is another shita about this, in which, in various ways, it is entirely possible to accept virtually everything, either by redefining the 6 days, or by saying that even if the 6 days are 24 hours, but there were prior worlds before this one that God made and destroyed, and that could refer to cataclysmic events in Earth itself, and things like dinosaurs are remnants of those prior worlds that got destroyed by ice ages and meteorite showers. This is actually advanced by the Tiferes Yisrael, the famous commentary on the Mishnah from the 19th century. Regarding evolution, let me just point out, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch lived in the time of Charles Darwin. And when Darwin's book on evolution came out, so somebody asked Rav Hirsch, can a religious Jew believe in the possibility of evolution? So Rav Hirsch said the following words. Rav Hirsch said, I'm not quoting, but I'm paraphrasing, evolution is a theory, it hasn't been proven, and by the way, that's still true today. But he said, even if it could be proven true to a 100% certainty, which of course it cannot, it would not shake his faith. Because as long as you believe Hashem guided the process, then Hashem has an infinite number of tools in his toolbox. And this could have been one of his tools. That's not a stira. Meaning, the one thing we can't accept is we can't accept randomness. We can't accept chaos. We can't accept it was just a process that happened. But once you accept it was a guided process, it was an intentional process, it was a purposive process, then it makes no difference how God did it. And Chumash Bereshis is not giving you all the scientific details of creation. In fact, many people have said that science and religion are answering two different questions. Science is asking how did God, how was the world created? Torah answers the question, why was the world created? The how and the why are two different types of questions. You see, so in many, many ways, evolution, age of the earth, dinosaurs, we can live with it all. As long as I believe there's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who created that reality. So these are the two approaches I think that you're going to find. There are approaches that say that the 5785 has to be taken very, very literal, very exact, and evolution it contradicts the text of the Torah, and therefore it's apikorsis, it's false. This has been a standard mahalech, but there are other ways of looking at it in which Hashem could use many, many processes. So I think there's room, meaning if you want to be an apikoros, and the reason you're given is because you believe in evolution, I say that's not enough of a reason to be an apikoros. You can still be a maimin on Hashem and subscribe to evolution. I just want to point out that one thing about evolution that's important to make the point. People often assume that evolution versus Torah is a conflict between science and religion. One has to know that although evolution kind of becomes standard scientific dogma, it is a very, very unstable theory. Meaning to this very day, if you look, I'll give you a few, there's a David Berlinski. He happens to be Jewish, but he's an atheist, which is fascinating. You see, if a religious person debunks evolution, that actually has less credibility for me because, well, of course he's going to debunk evolution because he wants to defend the Bible. I got that, right? So all of us are suspect in that way. But when you have a guy who doesn't believe in God, who says evolution doesn't work, that actually means a lot because he has no particular agenda that he's trying to promote. And his argument is that evolution, well, he has two arguments. It's a very interesting, David Berlinski, it's actually worthwhile either get his books or see his YouTubes. He makes two interesting points, scientific points, not religious points. He says that under the laws of thermodynamics, there's a law of entropy. Complex systems tend to disintegrate into chaotic, simple systems. That is the way it works unless there's some guiding force that's pushing it towards greater organization. Now, evolution works in exactly the opposite way. Evolution, you move from the simple to the complex. But under the laws of thermodynamics, that's an impossibility unless there's some conscious directive. So he says, so either evolution is wrong, or you got to believe in God. Meaning you can't kind of not believe in God and then say nature generates evolution, because the whole law of thermodynamics, the laws of chaos, the laws of entropy are going to move in the opposite direction. That's a very good argument. A second argument he makes, and again, he's not the first one, is that interim adaptations have no survival advantage, meaning the following. The original Darwinian theory of evolution basically was that in any population there'll be many, many genetic variations, but the variations that will tend to survive are those that have survival advantages. And eventually, over time, how you get from it to an interspecies change itself is another problem, but the changes are going to be so marked that you'll actually have another species, like little changes here, little changes here, little changes here. Eventually, from the amoeba, you get a human being. Now, the problem is, though, that there are a lot of steps between A and Z. And even if it's true that Z may have a survival advantage, but the M and N in the middle have no particular survival advantage, so there's no reason why they would survive in order to produce the next level. Again, I'm sorry, I can't come up with examples in that sense. And yet, if evolution works from an A to a Z, with all these intermediate stages, unless you posit there's a God, the survival of the fittest is not going to work, because a lot of the interim changes have no survival advantage at all. So that would, again, indicate the notion either evolution doesn't work that way or there's some guided process. So it is important to know that if you are of the view that Orthodox Judaism rejects evolution, which, and as I say, it doesn't have to be that way, it doesn't have to mean that you're an anti-science person. There are scientific grounds to reject evolution that one needs to be aware of, yeah.
But isn't a Sefer Bereshis a steer against evolution because it says that Adam Rishon was created from the ground of the earth? Which in other words, it would have to reject the claim that he was created from, or that he evolved from whatever species.
Yeah, so remember that the creation of man is described in two different stages. The body is created from the dust of the earth, and then God breathed into him the soul, the Spirit of God. Now, we tend to view those things as happening like the same time. God made the body. But if you posit that maybe there's a separation of time, so you could say that the body of the body is the body, which may have started as a lower form, and then came the divine soul, which was the culmination of that process. So obviously I understand there'll be a lot of tension with how to understand the narrative, but Ramban already says that the process of Bereshis is a great, great secret, and the Torah does not spell out all of the details. So I think there's a lot of room for different interpretation. Now, again, I'm not advocating how you should learn the Chumash in any particular way. All I'm saying is there are options. There are different interpretive options. There was a great, great Talmid Chacham. I mean, he really was of Gadol class, although he did not have a position as an official Rosh Hashiva or anything. Rav Gedalia Nadel of Bnei Brak, Zechrono Livracha, a great, great Talmid Chacham. He was a Talmid of the Chazon Ish. He was a very, very good friend of Rav Chaim Kanevsky. This is his Madrega. But he was an unconventional person, very unconventional, meaning he did not fit within the mold. For example, he worked, meaning he worked as a kablan. He worked in different types of jobs already, but he was mamish a gadol, and he gave a series of shiurim on many, many things. But among them was Chumash Bereshis, in which he actually talked about evolution, age of the earth, and he said that the Torah can accommodate all of these different shitos. Now, somebody published those shiurim in a series of books, Mitoraso, Shel Rav Gedalia. They might still be online, but there was some controversy. The family didn't want those things to be published. They were too unconventional. See, it's one thing, okay, I don't want to get into personalities. If someone like Rabbi Slifkin, a young guy, a very talented person, writes books with those ideas. So, you can, he could be knocked, he could be thrown, you could throw stones at him because young guy, etc. When Rav Nadel says something like that, you can't fool around with him because you're talking about a real gadol. So in a sense, Mitaresa Rav Gedalia was a much more dangerous book than Rabbi Slifkin's books because Rav Nadel could not be discredited. So the most they could say, of course they tried to say this, is that the guy who published the shiurim didn't understand it correctly. All right, there are those mahalchim. But the truth is, the guy who wrote the book happens to be, a very eminent Talmid Chacham as well. So he understood what he was hearing and the like. The point I want to make is I'm not here to make anybody apikorsim, God forbid. But all I'm saying is that there are ways of bridging the gap that people just need to be aware of. And Maaseh Bereshis can have a number of different interpretations. Yeah.
How should we look at reparations, not specifically by Nazi Germany, but would it be a lack of atachim to not accept it if it would help you do mitzvahs?
I'm sorry. Would it be a lack of bitachon not to accept? You saying?
Maybe you'd say that you're not really accepting it from God and you're taking it personally that they.
Yeah. So the issue of reparations. Now again, I'm not sure everything that you have in mind. Reparations are the idea that if a society has wronged a group of people, so sometimes to kind of make it up a little bit, the future generations of the persecutors offer money to the descendants of the victims. The big example, which is still going on to this very day, are various reparations offered by the German government to survivors. Actually, now there are very few survivors, but families of Holocaust victims. In the United States, reparations have been going on for black slavery and the like, and the like. So I am going to talk about Nazi reparations because Lagabi Klal Yisrael, that's the big thing. There are a number of people, chashuva people, who will not accept any reparations on behalf of the Nazis because reparations imply that the score is even. Oh, Baruch Hashem, you murdered my grandfather, but Baruch Hashem, you gave me money, so now we're buddies, now everything is good again, and they refuse. On the other hand, keep in mind that virtually every taxi, every cab in Israel, every bus in Israel, is essentially German. Basically, it comes from Germany, and it's part of these reparations deals and the like. Certainly it was in the early years of the state. So I think I could see the argument of not accepting reparations because you don't want to give a hechsher, you don't want to give a gushpanka, you don't want to give a seal of approval to evil, to imply that you can simply buy your way out of evil. On the other hand, the other thing to keep in mind is that the people who are offering the reparations are not the people who are doing the bad stuff. So, in a sense, it's a gesture by a future group that they don't, want to bear hate or animosity towards the Jewish people. So, I don't see it as such a bad thing. But to decline it, I don't see it as bad either. Meaning, I don't see that as a lack of bitachon. I think it just means I don't want my parnasa to come on the heels of the suffering that was inflicted on my people. So I don't see refusing it as negative, but I also don't see accepting it as something bad either. Okay, I'm going to have to stop in around just 2 minutes. Yeah.
Why is there a major debate between the Sfaradim and Ashkenazim between having your tzitzis uncovered or covered, and why do they interpret the verse that says in Shema, why do they interpret it differently?
Yeah, well, again, there is a big machlokas about tzitzis out or tzitzis in. It's interesting. Rav Reuven Feinstein, Rav Moshe Feinstein's surviving son, is a very, he says what he means. He doesn't hold anything back. So he was doing a Q&A. Someone just showed me this, mamish, yesterday, and someone said, at what age should my son wear his tzitzis out? So he just said, never. He says, I don't wear my tzitzis out. My father didn't wear his tzitzis out. He says, there's no such halacha. And the person started saying, well, what about this and this? He says, look at it and you tell me if there's such a halacha. He says, no such thing. So very, 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 very strong. But you are correct. The Arizal and the like all had the minhag of the tzitzis out. It's not so much it's Ashkenazi Sephardi simply because the rabbis on each side happen to be oriented along that thing. I don't think there's something intrinsic in Sephardim that they take that position. But the pasuk says, "Uri'isa moso," you shall see your tzitzis. So the interpretation, if you don't have your tzitzis out, is this is just informing you of the halacha. The Gemara says that there's no mitzvah of tzitzis at night because you can't see your tzitzis, but it's not referring to having them out. The Arizal and his followers took the position that there's a special concept of seeing your tzitzis out, and they do base it on a Gemara that looking at your tzitzis gives you yiras Hashem. Remember, the Gemara gives a story about a certain person who was about to be nichshal with a zayna. He was going to be with a prostitute. And his tzitzis slapped him in the face. I mean, that's understood non-literally, I think, but as he was undressing or whatever it is, the tzitzis hit his eyes. And then he realized, oy vey, my tzitzis remind me of the mitzvahs. I'm going to do this. So because of this, having tzitzis out, see, the drasha or re'isa mosa is not really a drasha. Chazal don't have such a drasha. It's not like the Torah requires it. This is what we call an asmachta, meaning the real reason is yiras Hashem. Looking at your tzitzis gives you yiras Hashem. They want to base it on the fact that the Torah uses the words re'isa mosa. But it's not a drasha, meaning it's not like Chazal have such a drasha. So really, it's more of a spiritual idea. Tzitzis remind me of mitzvahs, therefore I should see them. Ashkenazim simply say, hey, there's no makor in the Gemara for that idea, so therefore we don't necessarily have to follow it. But of course, as you know, even among Ashkenazim, even though it's true that classic Ashkenazic halacha did not have tzitzis out, but now it's become very, very common in the yeshiva world to do that. So now the difference in Ashkenazim and Sephardim is much less than it was. Last question.
Talmud Chacham who passes away with an unpublished book or something like that, and he says, "Don't put this out to the world," but you feel like the world needs to hear something like that. Rabbi Victor's book on the Holocaust. So it's like, was there any makar for publishing those types of things that like, don't put this out? Is there any like answer to maybe put it out or?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting, fascinating question. A Talmid Chacham, a Gadol, has written something, but for whatever reason does not want it to be published. But the person after his death sees that there's value here, that there's something that people could gain. Is he obligated to respect the author's wishes? Or can he say, hey, the benefits of Torah override whatever the author said, and therefore we will publish it even over the author's objection. One example of this, as you mentioned just now, was Rav Victor Miller's book on the Holocaust, in which he did not want it to be published. He wrote it. Why did he write it? I don't know, but he did not want it to be published, and it was published, right? You can get it. What's it called? Divine Madness, I think it's called. And of course, it's a controversial book. I mean, we don't have to get into that particular book, but basically, he said that the Holocaust happened because the Jews were becoming so assimilated that Hashem brought the tochacha on them. All right, that he developed the idea that the Holocaust was the tochacha, and it came from the assimilation that the Jewish people were undergoing in Eastern Europe. So some people resented, blaming the victim. Okay, the nature of that particular book is not relevant to this discussion, but the question is, are you mechuyev to listen to the author's instructions? So I think there are a few ways of analyzing this. First of all, there might be a simple monistic aspect, meaning to say the following. That book is a tangible thing. Now, when the author died, it belongs to somebody, whoever is the Yoresh. Now, if the Yoresh says you cannot publish this book, then whoever publishes it is stealing the book from the Yoresh. So to publish it over the objections of the Yoresh seems to be a simple example of theft. But that doesn't fully answer your question. What if the Yoresh wants to publish it? Meaning to say, the Yoresh, the heir, the legal heir, thinks this is such an important book that he wants it to be published. You can't call that Gezela at that point because he is the owner of the manuscript. Elamai, is he mechuyev to obey what his father or whoever it is said? So it's a very good question, but many would say when it comes to Torah, Torah should be available to everybody, and no one can put restrictions on the dissemination of Torah. So that would be one thing. So it's one thing to publish, let's say, private letters, Lashon Hara, private correspondence. But if you're talking about a Gadol's approach to Divrei Torah, it's not shayach even for the Gadol to say he does not want it to be disseminated. And in fact, this is said to be true not only when the Gadol is dead, but even when the Gadol is alive himself, that the Divrei Torah need to be nispashet. Yeah, I'm sorry, I do have to go, but anyway, have a good, it's not Tu B'Shvat, have a Tu B'Shvat Somayach.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.